I'm Dana Denha, and you're watching FYI. Every August in Washtenaw County, the ground rattles, the windows shake, and all eyes are to the sky during Thunder over Michigan. Being a pilot representing our country takes discipline, perseverance, and is not for the faint of heart.
Growing up, I always wanted to join the military, kind of like my dad, and I always wanted to be a pilot, so combining the two led me to go into the Naval Academy. Fortunate enough to get a pilot slot. You always have a little bit of question, like, can I be successful doing this? And you just kind of roll the dice and dare for greatness.
When it comes to this type of flying experience, it's a new challenge for sure. And flying close together is not something we're used to or comfortable with. But I don't think you'd even apply to this team if you were fearful.
The U.S. Navy Blue Angels and the U.S. Air Force Thunderbirds work together to bring awe-inspiring maneuvers as they soar as fast as the speed of sound.
It is around-the-clock jet training in order to put on this demonstration safely and make it look second to none.
But honestly, we share so much in common. Julius is talking about the training. We basically have the exact same training. In fact, towards the end of our training season, we go out and visit them in El Centro to learn best practices, share war stories, if you will.
We're always looking to improve our processes, and being able to share our best practices and how we do things is invaluable to putting on the absolute best flight demonstration that both teams can do for the American public.
Stay tuned, and we'll be back with more in exactly 30 seconds. Water affects our lives in many ways, and sometimes it can affect us in unexpected ways, bringing peace and tranquility to our life and loved ones. Watch as people share their innermost thoughts on Milan Beach. Ann Arbor's Water Lantern Festival brought the beauty of nature and inner thoughts to light.
It's a celebration for the community to come together, enjoy each other's company, and send out some messages, good vibes, hopes and dreams, whatever, out to the cosmos on the water.
I made a plan to try things that are new and look for things that are new. And this is something that's new to me. So I wanted to try it and come down and see what it was all about.
Just hanging out, having a lot of fun. It's been a day full of activities.
The lanterns float atop the water with one-of-a-kind messages of positivity.
When we have people that come out and put their hopes and dreams on their lanterns, we have people that write messages to lost loved ones, to friends that are far away. Sometimes we find like jokes, comic strips, whatever, like anything and everything on the lanterns. The event culminates with the lantern launch at sunset. Everyone has decorated their lanterns, and as soon as they're directed by the DJ, they will go to the edge of the water and release their lanterns out.
I'm recognizing my family and my grandparents that have passed and my mother that has passed.
Life is easy if we choose to be the star of our own life. And it all starts with love.
Love and light to everyone.
School bells are ringing, and that means safety on our roads is a priority. Between school buses, crosswalks, and the influx of pedestrians, our roadways can get congested fast. Learn more about back to school safety in this month's City Roundup in 60.
Hi everyone, I'm Officer Jamie Atkins with the Ann Arbor Police Department. It's that time of year again. It's time for kids to go back to school. Here are some basic traffic safety tips we should all remember. First of all, be alert, especially when you're in school zones, and be alert of the speed and make sure you obey that speed limit. Also, watch for school buses. Red flashing lights and an extended stop arm mean that that bus is stopping to load or unload children. We have 19 different locations across the city that are staffed with crossing guards. They help cross our children and get them safely to school. If you see a crossing guard in the intersection with their stop sign held up, make sure you stop and wait until that crossing guard has cleared out of the intersection. Don't block crosswalks. If you're stopped at a red light, waiting to turn, or looking for a parking space, make sure that you steer clear of the crosswalk so that people don't have to walk around your vehicle and possibly put themselves into moving traffic. Remember, folks, it's our job to keep kids safe as we go back to school this fall. Thanks everybody for watching, and parents, I hope you have a great and safe start to your school year.
Long before Trump and Brexit became headline news, extremists throughout history attempted daring moves to change the psyche of the people. Disruption: Why Things Change explores the chaos surrounding major political movements and how they shape the environment we live in today. Joining me is David Potter, author of Disruption. Welcome to the show, David.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a great pleasure to be on screen with you today as opposed to watching you on my TV.
Well, I'm so glad you watch this show. I always like when people tell me that they watch. I'd like to know a little bit more about you, David. What led you, to writing this book, Disruption? You're a professor, right?
I am. And it was really the Charlottesville business in 2017, and also some incidents around our campus at the University of Michigan. And I began to ask myself, what is wrong that we have a president who is actively opposed to the government of the United States? How did we get there? And how has this happened in the past? What are the underlying causes? What are the possible outcomes? And then as we watched the events of the last couple of years and leading up and through the election, I began to feel that it was really extremely important to try to start a discussion about where our options are, how do we get here, where do we go from where we are now. And also, as a historian, I think it's extremely useful to be able to use the past to frame issues in the present. Things are moving so fast these days that it really is by looking at the past that we can say, oh, we're now here, maybe before it's too late.
Yeah, I mean, even in the book, you talk about how things happen over time. And at the beginning of it, it was really slow because there wasn't this mass communication aspect. But nowadays, it's change is really fast. And with technology, we have it in our hand at all times. We always know everything that's happening. So I'm sure that has a huge effect on it. But when you talk about looking into the past, I mean, isn't that how we learn? Isn't that how we learn how to change and how to make things better?
Well, I'd like to think so. We can see patterns of very positive change and how that happens. We can also see how change goes completely off the rails. And we can see how different kinds of ideas come from sort of fringe areas of society to become sort of central to discussions that we're having. And in each one of the disruptions that I talk about in this book, what we suddenly see is how ideas come from the intellectual fringe to becoming a central aspect of discussion.
What, you talk about in 2017, aspects of things in your life, things happen on campus, and this sort of brought you to writing this book. When you were doing the research, did you have that sort of aha moment? Man, this is sort of there's parallels. I'm seeing these parallels between this, where you sort of discovered this idea of disruption.
Yes, it was really once I'd moved into the early modern period and the period of the Protestant Reformation that I began to really think a lot more about how that disruption related to things in the past and to more recent times, because it really was just an extraordinary story that a clergyman in southern Germany suddenly gets up, nails 95 theses, depending on which scholar you believe, to the door of a church, But crucially, what he has is an understanding of how the printing press works. And this is the point where media becomes really important to a disruption and the ability to communicate broadly, and how an established authority can't keep up with a disruptive force which understands media a lot better than it does. And that really helped shape everything else, I think, that went around it in the book.
So it's interesting too, when I was like doing research for this interview, and I'm looking at the book, and I was like thinking, you talk about, obviously Christianity and Islamic religions coming to the forefront, but honestly, I don't even think in my recent history, I can't think of even trying to think of those living a life without religion in it, which is such a strange thing to think about. Like at some point, there wasn't really a religion that people were, and this was created because of this sort of chaos, right?
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, people had belief in the supernatural, and they believed that they had ways to make contact with them. You could go to the local oracle. In fact, it's not that dissimilar to many things that we still see people doing today, our own substitute oracles and what have you. But what Constantine did was he established a religion with a single doctrine at the core of Roman government. And that had never happened before. There'd been all kinds of practices, but not a single intellectual doctrine of the sort that emerges with Christianity. And the same, of course, is true with the rise of Islam. Muhammad was an extraordinary charismatic character, but it was really Abd al-Malik who said, we have these ideas now, how do we use them to shape a new ideology to govern this new state that has all of a sudden come into being? And then, of course, with the Protestant Reformation, we have a movement which begins with the ideas, sorry, we got it all wrong. We've got to change this. The doctrines that have emerged in the last few hundred years aren't in scripture. So how do we get back to a true way of thinking about our relationship with the divine? But at the same time, this begins to open up new questions about how we relate to each other.
Yeah, and it changes the social aspect of it, which is also something that you go back to in the book, how these sort of politics can change the way we interact with each other.
Yes, exactly. And when we look, say, at the French Revolution, for instance, what we have are a group of people very much motivated by a series of ideas, but increasingly also by contempt and hatred for their colleagues. And the same set of ideas that are used in North America to create the Constitution of the United States in France result in the terror and ultimately the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte. And what you've done is torn a society apart without having a really valid model for what you can put in its place.
You talk about these people over time, these sort of people that emerge as like sort of leaders of something, they're creating this disruption. Do you find that these, I'm going to say it's predominantly men, because that's what we know about history. Do you find that they have similar characteristics? What makes them sort of stand out in a crowd that people would listen to them? Is it because of their background, their family, their lineage, or is it because of their charisma and just the way they speak?
It really is very much a case of charisma. The people we talk about in this book all come from very different kinds of backgrounds. I mean, the Emperor Constantine was the son of a previous emperor, but he had been left out of the line of succession because his father had to remarry to become deputy emperor. Still, socially, he's very much at the top of the heap. Muhammad, of course, is very much on the fringe of Meccan society. And ultimately, of course, the caliphs are leaders of a community that he formed. But this is a very new political group. Martin Luther is a middle class, the son of a middle class miner, who has gone to university. He aligns himself with a reasonably powerful German princeling, but again, not at the political summit at all. They forge a new society or new organization that way. When we look at our 20th century examples, somebody like Vladimir Lenin hadn't been in Russia for more than a decade before the revolution in 1917. And again, he's a man from a very middle class background. He's very well educated, but he's not, Prince somebody. And Hitler, of course, comes from a very lower middle class background. But they all have the ability to listen to what's going on and to shape a message that people are going to want to listen to. And that's, in a way, the ability to listen first is the most important thing that all of these people have in common.
It's funny because that's something I always mention on this show is the importance of listening. And in this case, in some cases, they're using it as a disadvantage to the populace because obviously the things that Hitler did were not something that we ever wanted to experience in our history. But, you also talk about this idea. So this idea that they all have these sort of similarities, that they want a unified society. And you talk about it, sometimes it's a foolish notion that they move forward with, and sometimes it's a really educated one. And can you talk about that idea of like this unified society in that sometimes it just doesn't work the way that people want it to?
No, well, it certainly doesn't. I think that the critical thing is for the leaders to create a space where compromise is possible. Now, one of the things that is, I think, very interesting about Lenin is he seizes power with a vision of creating a new communist society, and then realizes, oh, that doesn't really work all that well, and we're going to move into a different kind of economic structure at the end of the Civil War to try to bring people together. It's an ability to shift directions in his case. I mean, Constantine was a man who was able to create a great deal of central space. He comes and says, I am a Christian, this is my God. My God is very good at battles, that's why I'm here. And I heartily think that you should join me. And if you don't want to, well, that's just, too bad, but I'm not going to force anybody to do anything. I mean, Constantine, when he was young, had seen religious persecution in action, and he realized it didn't work. Abd al-Malik, again, create central space, allow people to come together to find their own way of joining rather than compelling them to do so.
We found ourselves, in 2016, where you and I discussed this, that we were shocked by sort of the outcome of the election. How would someone that, over 50% of the population would be shocked that they could become the American president? How does something like this happen?
It happens if you don't really take account of what the risk factors are. Why are people unhappy? What is driving this movement very deeply? You have got to take off your rose-tinted glasses and say, no, there really are reasons for people to be very deeply unhappy. We go back, say, to the 1930s. There's a depression. If there hadn't been for the depression and the inept response by the German government, Nazism would never have emerged as a force it did. But again, a lack of sense of what are the consequences? Why are people unhappy? What can I do to directly affect their unhappiness, the reasons why they have lost faith in our institutions?
To me, though, this is another thing that seems to be a parallel that goes on with is this idea of racism. And I didn't think racism, I guess I had my rose-colored glasses on because I didn't think racism was as prevalent until we had what I would consider a president that was openly racist.
Yes, and I think that we have to be very conscious of the ideology that lies behind it, which has been present in this country for a very long time. It was certainly emerging in the late 19th century, the sort of idea that there is a competition between different racial groups for supremacy was basic to social Darwinism. And these social Darwinist principles came to the United States in the late 19th century, and they flourished here really for more than a century. We saw it in the 1920s, for instance, with American eugenic legislation. These laws are still on the books, allowing for forcible sterilization. The immigration laws of the 1920s, trying to favor one race over another. And that is in fact saying, well, of course, if you're a Northern European white person, we would like to have you. If you're a Southern European or Central European or Jewish or Asian, then we don't want you in this country. So what we saw with Trump was a reassertion of ideas that have been latent in American political society for a very long time. And those Confederate statues that the group in Charlottesville was there to support, of course, had gone up at the turn of the 20th century as people were turning back the hoped for result of the Civil War that would be an equal society for everybody, with the passage of the Jim Crow laws. I mean, all of this overthrowing, as it were, of the result of the American Civil War was informed by this ideology.
Do you foresee, you talk about the future in this book. Do you foresee that we can have a leader that emerges where these racist ideologies can sort of start dissipating to a place where I feel, a world where I feel comfortable and my daughter feels comfortable, and we don't have to hate people for the color of their skin or where they were born? Because I've honestly dealt with racist things in my life myself because I'm half Arab.
Yes. I am very concerned about how we can make that kind of progress, because it's not just in the United States that we see public racist ideology. I mean, you had it in Brexit in Britain, that we have to, the immigrants are sweeping away our benefits. You still see it now with the Alternative for Deutschland. You can see it with Marine Le Pen's group. Or Viktor Orban. It's a basic sort of built-in response to identify a group of outsiders as being a threat to who you are and what you're doing. And I think that the only way that we can move beyond that is by realizing what we're doing, that we are creating a lie. And once you can admit that these statements are simply false, then maybe you can move ahead. But the fact that we've had this in place now for so long makes me worry about whether or not we can see a change. I deeply hope that we can, and maybe by being willing to stand up and talk about it and talk about where these ideas come from, to realize the sort of horror of the bogus science that lies behind them, that these are the ideas that brought us Nazism, and they're here with us again today. Maybe when we can see that, we can say, okay, that's got to change.
Yeah, I hope so. I really do. Before we go, you talk about this idea of technology and business sort of incorporated into politics now, because the business community has this mantra of change is good. And that's sort of how I think Trump got in the door to begin with, where people were like, he's a businessman. We want something different. And that was what I heard from a lot of people that voted for him. Talk about that idea of change is good and how this is sort of just becoming into the American consciousness. And it's making the conservative political landscape change a lot faster than it had in the past.
Well, I think that's right. What I look at was how we've developed this sort of ideology of change, disruption is good, well, actually, disruption may be good for you, but it's not going to be good for a whole lot of other people over here. I mean, I think that Biden has begun to address this by appointing people like Irene Khan, who are devoted to undoing the monopoly capitalistic power of big tech companies. But large tech has enormous political clout. And again, if you can't face up to it and can't agree that it really isn't good for one person to be able to manage the marketplace in this country and then shoot himself into outer space for fun, perhaps just looking at the billionaire space ride, we can realize just how unbalanced the economy has become, and that it will be possible. There is a will here to try to undo this, to bring back antitrust legislation. It's true on both sides of the Atlantic, and there is a recognition that the inequity that has been increasingly built into the system is something that government once again needs to take on.
Well, before we go, David, why don't you just tell people why they should check out Disruption, why it's a must read for everyone?
Well, I think it will give everybody a chance to see where we are in a broader perspective. And I hope it gives everybody a chance to see some of the world's most powerful ideas and to understand how they've developed with each other, whether it's the rise of Islam, or it's the theory of government from John Locke, or Rousseau to Marxism, and even the horrors of social Darwinism, but to see the interplay of idea and action over time.
Thank you so much, David, for being on the show.
Thank you, Dana, very much for having me. It was a pleasure to talk to you today.
For more on this and other programs, visit a2gov.org/CTN. Visit youtube.com/CTN Ann Arbor to see all that we have to offer. And remember to like, subscribe, and ring that notification. Thanks for watching and tune in next time to FYI.